They never told you the full truth about African history, not because it didn't happen, but because some stories are too dark, too painful, and too powerful to ignore. Today, we uncover 5 dark secrets in African history they never taught you. And trust me, by the time we reach number 1, you may never look at history the same way again. Because some of the darkest chapters in human history were not hidden by time, they were hidden on purpose. Secret number 5, the looting of the Benin Kingdom. We begin in what is now Nigeria. Long before colonial rule fully took over West Africa, the Kingdom of Benin was already one of the most powerful and organized kingdoms on the continent. But this was not a weak or forgotten place. This was a kingdom known for royal power, advanced art, deep culture, and incredible craftsmanship. And one of the greatest symbols of that greatness was what the world now calls the Benin bronzes. They were not just decorations, they were historical records, they were royal memory, they were identity. But in 1897, British forces invaded Benin City during what became known as the Benin Expedition. And after the city was taken, thousands of cultural objects were looted. The royal palace was damaged, and many sacred items were carried away as war spoils. Today, many of those objects are still in museums outside Africa, even though some institutions have started returning them. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine strangers entering your home, burning what your ancestors built, and carrying away the very things that tell your story. This was not just theft, it was the stealing of memory. And that is what makes this part of African history so painful. Because when a people lose their treasures, they do not just lose art, they lose pieces of themselves. So the next time someone sees the Benin bronzes in a museum and call them beautiful, they should also remember this: beauty was taken by force, and that truth still echoes today. And if that sounds dark, what comes next is even worse, because the next story is not about stolen objects, it's about stolen lives. Secret number 4, the Herero and Nama genocide. Now we go to present-day Namibia. And this is one of the darkest and most painful chapters in African history. Between 1904 and 1908, under German colonial rule in what was then called German Southwest Africa, the Herero and Nama peoples were brutally attacked in a campaign that many historians recognize as genocide. Huge portions of Herero population were killed, and thousands of Nama also died. This did not happen in secret. This was not a rumor. This was real. People were driven into deadly conditions. Many died from thirst, starvation, violence, and imprisonment. Families were shattered, communities were broken, and entire futures were wiped out. When people talk about the horrors of the 20th century, many people jump straight to Europe. But before many of the world's most infamous crimes, Africa had been already bleeding. That is why this story matters. Because too many people know the word genocide, but too few know that one of the earliest genocides of the 20th century happened on African soil. And when history leaves that out, it is not just forgetfulness, it feels like another injustice. Because silence can also be a weapon. And when the world does not remember your suffering, it can feel like your pain never counted. And if you think that was the end of colonial cruelty, the next story proves that hunger itself was turned into a weapon. Secret number 3, the Maji Maji Rebellion and the Great Hunger. Now we move to present-day Tanzania. In the early 1900s, people in German East Africa were suffering under colonial rule. They were being forced into systems that benefited outsiders more than the people who lived there. One of the biggest causes of anger was forced cotton production. People were pressured to grow crops for colonial profit instead of their own survival. And eventually, resistance exploded. This became known as the Maji Maji Rebellion, a major uprising against German rule from 1905 to 1907. But what happened after that is what makes this story so disturbing. The rebellion was crossed with brutal force, and the violence combined with scorched earth tactics and destruction of food supplies, which helped trigger a famine so devastating that huge number of people died. Many estimates range from tens of thousands up to hundreds of thousands, mostly from hunger, disease, and conditions created by the crackdown. Think about that. Not just war, not just punishment, but suffering so widespread that people began dying because the ground itself could no longer feed them. And this is why this chapter of history is so heavy. Because sometimes the darkest violence is not always the bullet. Sometimes it is the empty field. Sometimes it is the missing harvest. Sometimes it is a child waiting for food that will never come. And yet, so many people around the world have never even heard of the Maji Maji Rebellion. That should tell you something. Because when Africa pain is not widely taught, it becomes easier for the world to move on without fully facing what happened. But not every dark secret in African history is only about violence. Some are about lies. And the next one is a lie so big. It tried to steal Africa's brilliance itself. Secret number 2, the attempt to erase Great Zimbabwe. Now let's talk about one of Africa's greatest historical symbols, Great Zimbabwe, a massive stone city in southern Africa. Powerful, advanced, architectural stunning, and impossible to ignore. For centuries, Great Zimbabwe stood as proof that African civilizations built great cities, complex societies, and a major centers of trade long before colonial powers tried to define Africa for themselves. But here is the dark secret. For a long time, some colonial voices refused to believe Africans built it. Instead of accepting African achievement, they pushed false theories that outsiders must have created it. Why? Because admitting the truth would destroy the racist myth that Africa had no great civilization of its own. Historians today firmly recognize Great Zimbabwe as the work of ancestors of the Sona people, and the all non-African origin theories are discredited. Let that sink in. A people built something extraordinary, and instead of being honored, they are told it could not possibly be theirs. That is not just colonial ignorance. That is intellectual theft. That is the theft of pride, the theft of identity, the theft of proof. And maybe that is one of the darkest things colonization ever did. Not only taking land, but trying to control what people were allowed to believe about themselves. Because once you convince a people that they never built greatness, you make it easier to rule them. And that is why Great Zimbabwe is not just a monument. It is evidence. Evidence that Africa was never empty of genius. It was simply denied the credit. And now we come to number 1. And this one may be the most painful of all, because it is not only about kingdom, one people, or one place. It is about a wound that crossed oceans. and its pain still lives in families today. Secret number one, the true human cost of the Congo Free State. Now we go to Central Africa, and this is one of the darkest chapters not only in African history, but in human history. In the late 19th and early 20th century, the Congo Free State was controlled by King Leopold II of Belgium. Despite the name, it was not free in the way the word sounds. For many Congolese people, it became a place of forced labor, terror, punishment, and suffering tied especially to the rubber trade. Villages were pressured to meet impossible demands. People were abused, communities were shattered, and historians widely describe this era as one of extreme brutality, with population loss on a massive scale, though exact numbers remain debated. This is the part of history that should make anyone pause, because behind wealth in Europe, there was blood in Africa. Behind luxury, there was pain. Behind profit, there were broken families. And for many people around the world, this story still does not get the attention it deserves. That is what makes it such a dark secret. Not because nobody knows it happened, but because too many people know it only as a footnote. A footnote for one of the most horrifying systems of exploitation ever forced on African people. Imagine entire communities living under fear. Imagine hands forced to work. Imagine punishment hanging over every family. Imagine trying to survive in a system where your humanity means less than profit. That is not just cruelty. That is a nightmare written into history. And the truth is, when the world talks about empire, trade, and civilization, too often it leaves out the screams that paid for it. That is why this history is number one. Because if history is told without the pain of Congo, then history is not being told honestly. And after hearing all of this, one thing becomes painfully clear. Africa was never empty. Africa was never weak. Africa was never without greatness. But again and again, its people were robbed. Its stories were twisted. Its pain was minimized. And its brilliance was often hidden from the world. That is why these are not just dark secrets. These are truths. Truths that should be spoken. Truths that should be remembered. And truths that should never be buried again. Because when history is hides the suffering of people, it does not only erase the past, it damages the future too. Now I want to ask you something. Which of these dark secrets shocked you the most? Was it the looting of Benin, the genocide in Namibia, the famine after Maji Maji, the lies about Great Zimbabwe, or the horror of the Congo Free State? Tell me in the comments. And if you want more powerful stories, dark history, world mysteries, and hidden truths that they never taught you, subscribe or follow, depending on which platform you are watching right now. Because the next story might be even more disturbing, and the world needs to hear it. Thanks for being part of the family.